Batman has one of the most popular rogues galleries ever. It's probably actually the most popular. A lot of people love Batman for many reasons. He's the most popular hero for a reason, but it's not a bad assumption to make where if Batman didn't have a strong gallery of villains, he would not be nearly as interesting. Think about every single time there's a new Batman movie coming out. What's one of the first things that people ask? I'll tell you. It's who's the new villain gonna be? That question doesn't get asked for every hero movie, but for Batman, will the Batman Part 2 have Mr. Freeze? Hush. Batman villains are a huge part of why he's wildly popular. A lot of questions and philosophies are thrown into the mix with Batman and his villains, one of them being the topic of this video. Did Batman create his villains? It's a question that gets debated online all the time. In the actual stories themselves, they debate them, and it's just everywhere in general. This could be seen as a black and white answer, but I think there's more to it that I think a full-on video is warranted enough to go in depth with. If you like more in-depth general superhero discussions like this one, let me know in the comments, but say it in a condescending way because I find it funny. Subscribe too because YouTubers have to say that, and also watch my live streams because I want more people to see me suffer, but let's move on. Okay, so I'm not going to drag the question on the entire video if you're just here for the black and white answer, so let's just answer it here. Does Batman create his villains? If I were to answer it in a yes or no response purely, I would say no. But more in depth, there are exceptions to that answer, but primarily, no. I don't think Batman creates his villains. I think that's, for the most part, a very silly thing to say when you look more into Batman's villains. This isn't a thing that only real life people like you and me say, but the Batman stories themselves write about it. Some of Batman's villains themselves mention how Batman's very existence creates them. And while that's an interesting topic to explore, I think in a black and white sense, Batman straight up had nothing to do with his villains becoming villains. Rather, it's Gotham City itself that creates the villains. The corruption of the city, how Gotham's inhabitants are so batcrap insane and malicious that it drives people to the point of pure insanity. This is something the Joker himself even understands.
You just can't get it through your thick scalp. Ugh. We both exist because of them!
Give up! You've lost.
But let's look at some examples of villains that become villains without Batman whatsoever. Let's start with the mobsters in Gotham. Penguin? Penguin would still be the Penguin without Batman. If we're really looking at a black and white sense, Batman had nothing to do with the Penguin rising to power. Black Mask. Where did Batman do anything here with him? Nothing. Okay, but those are some basic villains. But let's move on past the common mobster villains and go more into supervillain territory. Mr. Freeze. Victor Freeze would have became Mr. Freeze if Batman wasn't there 100%. Mr. Freeze became who he was because of a greedy company that gave him false promises. It had nothing to do with Batman at all. Poison Ivy. Ivy became her plant villain self because of the malicious man she worked with as well as her experimentations. What about Firefly? Firefly was insane from the get-go and burned people alive and made his suit and became Firefly. Mad Hatter was always going to be a monstrous PDF. Man-Bat? Kirk was going to test his experiments and become a giant evil bat creature anyway. Ra's al Ghul. Ra's al Ghul was Ra's al Ghuling long before Batman. He targets areas with high crime. He was going to attack Gotham with or without the Dark Knight. If you're speaking from a pure black and white sense, a lot of Gotham's villains would have became villains without the existence of Batman. A lot of what these villains have in common is that it's Gotham City itself that creates them, and we're going to keep talking about Gotham City. Gotham City creates these villains, not Batman. Gotham City created Batman. Gotham City created Joker, and Gotham City created most of these villains. Now, with that being said, I believe, yes, there are exceptions. Let's take the biggest example here, the Joker. Did Batman create the Joker? This is an exception to me where I could see the answer being yes, Batman did create the Joker to an extent. If we're going with a generally agreed upon origin where Batman stops the Red Hood heist in which the Joker falls into a vat of acid and gets his clown persona, then yeah. Because what if the Joker fell in there if Batman didn't show up? Maybe he wouldn't have. Or would he have died in the shootout if Batman did not show up? Those are questions that we don't know. It can be argued that because of Batman's appearance there, Gotham's biggest and most dangerous villain exists because of him. And if you don't believe that, then there's another argument here that falls on this notion that I will explain about the Joker in the next topic of this video after I list some more examples of villains that could argue to be existing because of Batman. So let's look at those first. The first one I want to talk about is Bane. Would Bane exist and be a threat in Gotham if it's not for the Batman? Bane has nightmares of a demonic bat creature from his hometown and travels to Gotham believing his role is to kill Batman because of so. Would Bane become the ruthless enemy in Gotham we see him as if Batman didn't exist? And it's really possible that no, he wouldn't be in Gotham. Bane would still be Bane, but he would probably just be chilling back at his own country and be the venom addicted behemoth there. But he likely wouldn't be in Gotham City if there was no Batman. There are other specific examples too, like what about somebody like Hush? Hush is an interesting case as it's not Batman that created him, but Bruce Wayne himself. So that goes into the question of Bruce Wayne creating villains like Hush. It's true that possibly Thomas Elliot wouldn't have become Hush if Bruce did not exist, but if Thomas Elliot was this insane in the first place, he would have probably taken another persona if Batman didn't exist, considering, like I said, he's a psychopath. But then there are direct examples too that I don't want to gloss over, like Jason Todd. Would Red Hood have become the vigilante without Batman? No, he would not have. Jason would probably just stay as some kid in the slums of Gotham, probably being a thief. Red Hood's not a villain, but you get my point with him as well. My point here with the list of villains I just went over is that yes, there are some villains and some examples you can argue that because of Batman's existence, they are a thing in Gotham or do exist because of him. But that list is far lower than the list of villains that would have became who they are without Batman. So that's the gray area you could argue in tackling the question. Yeah, Batman may have created some villains indirectly, but that same idea can be said for other heroes too. Iron Man, Flash, even Spider-Man. That trait doesn't specifically belong to Batman, so it's just food for thought, but in my opinion is a weak argument overall. But this does bring up a question I think is legitimate here in this idea. So Batman doesn't create his villains, in a yes or no question anyway. He doesn't. However, does Batman's continued existence keep these villains coming back over and over and over again to wreak havoc on Gotham? And I think that's something that I feel has more weight to it. Let's go over it. Let's start with the biggest villain of all, the Joker. Now, the Joker, would he continue being Joker if Batman did not stay around? And this question has been answered already. We saw that in The Dark Knight Returns, when Batman retired, the Joker was just chilling. He was lifeless. He didn't really have a purpose, and he wasn't really hurting anybody. But once Batman came back, this guy got back all his energy and decided to cause destruction and kill a lot of people once again. Batman is the reason Joker does what he does. That cat and mouse game is what he lives for. He's addicted to it. So yes, I would argue that because of Batman's continued existence, the Joker is still around to cause chaos in Gotham. So much that you maybe could argue that city might be safer without a Batman protecting it, since Joker wouldn't be a thing either, but at the same time, probably not. It's not just the Joker too. A lot of the villains Batman locks up get pissed and come back trying to kill him. Take the Riddler, for example. The Riddler hates being second, and every time Batman beats him, he comes up with a different, perhaps more dangerous scheme to get to him. Taking the Arkham games, for example, Riddler went from planning trophies around Arkham Asylum to then building straight up Saw death traps with hostages in Arkham City and Arkham Knight. Batman makes these villains become more unhinged. Riddler is a perfect example of that. The progression of a villain's relationship that spirals out of control to the point where Gotham is in more danger with each time the Riddler breaks out is something we have to note. We recently saw this in the live action movies too with the Batman, where Riddler did what he did in the hopes that Batman would see his perspective to try and work with him, and when that didn't happen, well, Riddler kind of crashed out hard. And it's not just villains like the Joker and Riddler, but also just the exact existence of Batman that keeps villains in Gotham, like Bane. We mentioned Bane earlier, but would Bane still stay in Gotham if Batman retired or stopped existing? Maybe, maybe not. One of the main reasons he was there was to kill the demon bat in his dreams, which would be Batman. Maybe he'd be chilling in Santa Prisca still if Batman died or retired. These are questions that intrigue me personally more than the initial one in the video. I think that Batman does not, for the most part, create his villains, but I do think that his continued existence and his theatrical presentation encourage these villains to continue to do more evil. It's like sour Skittles. You know how sour Skittles aren't healthy for you, but they're so good, and once you buy it for one Walmart trip alongside your Quest protein chips, you end up buying it every single time, and now you're addicted? Same concept with Batman here, and totally not my personal addiction. Point is, Batman's continued existence sparks a question. Was it worth it for Batman to stay in Gotham to protect it if it means all these villains will become progressively more evil? Is it worth Batman becoming Batman in the first place? Because now, due to him, Batman encourages more theatrical villains to become bigger and bigger threats like Joker. So looking at it in that way, in a sense, Batman does create his villains to become worse, more eviler, versions of themselves. I find that idea more interesting because you can disagree. You could argue that these villains would get worse and worse by themselves, and yes, that is very much a possibility. Villains like Firefly or Clayface, I would say that they would just stay the same. It's all the idea of escalation, right? It's put perfectly in Batman Begins.
What about escalation?
Escalation.
We start carrying semi-automatics, they buy automatics. We start wearing Kevlar, they buy armor-piercing rounds.
Man.
And you're wearing a mask, jumping off rooftops.
It's an interesting philosophy to take, but to go back to something I discussed briefly near the beginning of the video, it's not Batman that creates the villains, but Gotham City itself and its grim, corrupt underworld leaders that control it. The funniest part of this is the corrupt leaders that actually create these animals are the ones that put the blame on Batman creating the villains. Take Hugo Strange as an example. Hugo is the one that says its existence creates these animals.
I have a question for you. Before my arrival, this city was drowning under attack. Have you ever considered that all this is your fault? Your presence creates these animals. Like germs, they spread. You created the environment that allowed the germ to mutate, to become stronger. Look at the Joker. Would he even exist if not for you? It must be depressing. All your sacrifices, and yet you are the one to blame.
But in the Arkham universe, Hugo is responsible for turning Albert Falcone into potentially the Holiday Killer. He toys with the other villains and makes them bigger threats in Arkham City. He's been there before Batman was around. He was a corrupt leader that you can argue has helped create the monsters of Gotham. Dr. Crane, the Scarecrow in that universe, same thing. He was responsible for creating villains like the Ventriloquist, as seen in Batman Arkham Shadow. The corrupt leaders of Gotham City, as well as Gotham things like perhaps inequality or poverty, if you really want to get into the nitty and gritty, are responsible for creating Gotham's most evil. But as we see in the games and stories and everything, Batman is usually blamed for creating them. If anything, Batman is the ultimate personification of Gotham and its corruption. Out of the pure evil of Gotham, it spawns its own worst enemy, Batman. Batman is sort of a karma, if you will, to the city that it gets a taste of its own medicine. It's a good example of using something that's easy to blame to cover up for anything else. And this idea isn't original to me. It's discussed in multiple Batman medias that I want to go more in depth with. Across movies to comics to games, I guess is already mentioned, but let's talk about more examples to get a clear picture of this. First one I want to talk about is the Long Halloween comic. The Long Halloween comic is a good example of this. That story is basically about how the era of regular criminals like Falcone and Maroni, those crime families, they're now ending, and the era of supervillains is now reigning upon Gotham. Poison Ivy, Solomon Grundy, Two-Face are examples of this. Was Batman responsible for these villains becoming who they are? No. You could argue that due to Batman's involvement, maybe that led Harvey to getting half his face scarred and becoming Two-Face, but that's a stretch. This is a perfect example of Gotham City itself creating these villains. The landscape of the city itself changes into a more theatrical and outlandish era. I think the story made it clear about that it's a new era with not Batman creating it, but Gotham itself as a corruption inside the city, like the Holiday Killer, shifts the landscape forever. It's interesting because Gotham City itself spawns the evil that destroys it, but at the same time it creates the hero that goes on to save it. It's a very interesting dynamic that I feel is pretty subtle. I think about that when reading over The Long Halloween, which makes it more compelling for me. Batman is created alongside the villains, period, and he just happens to fight for the good side. Or how about something very popular Batman related, like the Dark Knight trilogy by Christopher Nolan? At the end of Batman Begins, like I mentioned earlier briefly, Gordon talks about escalation. We start wearing Kevlar. They buy armor-piercing rounds. Someone runs around in a bat costume jumping off rooftops. A guy in a clown costume shows up out of nowhere, which we follow up on in the sequel, The Dark Knight. Did Batman's existence allow Joker to embrace his villain self here? We don't know, since the origin of the Joker in that particular movie was very ambiguous and not shown, but Batman's continued existence allows his Joker to keep wreaking havoc, to keep playing the cat and mouse game they have, which Joker clearly states in his final scene. This is an example of showing how Batman's continued existence creates these villains, and perhaps the Joker wouldn't be as terrorizing to the city should Batman not be around. This is exactly what happened in the Dark Knight Returns animated movies, as I also stated earlier. I'm bringing these up just to give clear-cut examples of the things I'm trying to convey. Or how about direct examples of Gotham City itself creating their villains? The notion of Gotham being corrupted is very easy to tell with something direct, like the Court of Owls. The long-running villain group in Gotham has been around for centuries, way before Batman. If you're trying to look for specific, direct examples of Gotham's corruption before Batman. The court here is perfectly that, as they've been influencing Gotham's political, economic, and basically every other big word decision for the entirety of the city's lifespan in a way. There's also the correlation of Batman's existence itself keeping these villains around because of his no-killing rule. Does Batman's continued existence keep villains around because of his no-killing rule? Think about all the times Joker has killed because Batman chose not to kill him. Now, this is not a knock to Batman. I personally believe Batman doesn't have to kill anybody. It's his choice whether you think it's right or not. But because of that rule, his villains get to live, get to exist, keep being villains, keep breaking out and hurting more people, which in a sense can create these villains. If you were a killer, these villains would not be created, rather, just gone forever. The context of Batman creating his villains can mean a lot of different things, which is why I want to bring up his no-killing thing here in this video. You can make it a simple yes or no question, or you can add way more nuance or depth to it like I'm trying to do here. Since Batman allows his villains to live alongside Gotham, and Arkham being terrible at keeping them locked up for some reason, these villains are created and continue to exist because of so, and in a sense, could be argued that Batman creates his villains. He chooses not to kill. Cool, but now there are potential consequences with that when you have giant crocodiles eating people or a plant lady summoning giant plants killing everything in its path. The concept of Batman creating his villains depends on how you see it. In a black and white sense, no, he didn't. In an in-depth way, you could argue that his continued existence pushes these villains to their full potential, and you can also argue that he did create some villains like maybe the Joker, but I think in an overall sense, no. Batman did not create his villains. The villains, like Batman, are a product of the plague that is Gotham. Gotham City creates the monsters that drown in its filth, but it also birthed the warrior that will protect it from so. And with that being said, I think it's dumb as to say that Batman created his villains. But what do you think? It is a subjective question. Like, people can say yes, Batman does create his villains, but I think that's completely wrong, and I'm factually correct, and you are not if you think that way. But I still want to hear your side if you believe that. Let me know your thoughts on what I said. I like to think about questions like this in a deep way, especially in the shower, and think more outside of why the question's asked. And this is the video where I gather all my thoughts to do that. So I hope what I said makes sense, but you let me know. Let me know what your favorite flavor of ice cream is, best place to travel in the Philippines, which country has the best food, all that, man. I really appreciate it. Leave a like on the video, subscribe if you want, watch the streams if you care, but other than that, have a nice day. Hope you enjoy the video, and I'll see you in the next video. Stay safe, really, and peace.